All right, welcome everybody. I'd like to call to order the Human Resources Committee meeting. Oh, Member Gorham is here too. And we'll start with Mr. Swirsky on the board report. Is there anything?
Going through the board report on the human resource action items, you'll see a number of contract extensions, certified extension for summer work through special services, ALC, the residentials, a number of the organizations that run regular summer programming through the summer. So those involve contract extensions, which extends their salaries. It's not a summer school type program. Also, you'll see some of the curriculum specialists in there that get contract extensions to help coordinate curriculum writing during the summer. Yeah, ALC and as far as the residentials, you'll see on here too, they do run regular programming extended. So. We have left some placeholders in there, so we might get some additional appointments in. After today, we generally take the placeholders off. I was going to mention under non-certified retirement. So we'll have our it's a systems analyst. It's not analyst, systems. Remember the official business service systems. It's basically payroll in our Business Plus systems, and that's Robin Evanson is going to be taking, and we've done a few of these, but it's called a phased retirement through PERA. So they are able to reduce their hours, reduce their FTE, collect some retirement through PERA, and then they're still with us for a phased amount of time. So we'll be adding her name to that list.
And are all the resignations or the up to date?
Up to this point in time, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Any questions, anyone? Member Lefferkamp?
Yeah, I was thinking of a follow-up question to the resignation question I was going to ask that you ask, Member Kirby. But let's see here. We had a total of how many resignations? Or not resignations, but
retirements.
Retirements.
I think we're up to a total. We're around with some of these on here. I think 45 now.
Okay.
It was 43 before, and I see a couple more.
And is there any kind of timeline that people who may still want to retire that they're working under?
We take a look at we take a look at what their request is and why they're retiring at this point. It's not unusual in the course of the summer that some, especially on the teacher side, they realize how close they are and they wanted to go that one more year, but they're having a spectacular summer and it's nice out, and they'll call in and say, I'd like to put it in, and we generally wouldn't deny them.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say this at our meeting next week, but as we've been out at the retirement parties around the district, it's been really wonderful to hear what our retirees have been saying about their careers, whether it was 10 years or 35 years with our district, and people have felt like they've had a good life working with our district. So. Thank you for making that happen as well.
And I would point out Nancy Elmore, who is retiring from Laura MacArthur, and she's had a long career with us as a clerical.
Okay. Anything else? All right. Next, we have two resolutions, really. Do you want to speak to those? Are those one to come up every year? I
put these back in here again. We're still we're a little bit behind on staffing, and I wanted to maintain these in here so I didn't miss anybody. We didn't have a complete listing last month, and I like to do these, usually over a period of 2 months. But the certified of non-tenured certified, I don't see. That would be. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, the non-tenured. These will be individuals who we have not eliminated their positions yet based on they were on variances or some various other reasons, and we're still trying to place them. If we're unable to place them by the June board meeting, we will have to put their names on here because anybody after July 1st is considered to have a continuing contract, and if I can't guarantee that they are placed by then, this covers us so we don't have to go through layoffs after the school year starts. The next one, approval of termination of certified staffs. There are some individuals that, for one reason or another, some pieces of their position may be involved there. I don't anticipate anybody fully. This would be layoffs of certified staff, and I don't anticipate anybody fully being laid off, but I do see some bits and pieces of .1s, .2s, those types of things that might be on there.
Any questions about that?
My question to Mr. Swirsky is if there's reduction of certified tenured staff, was there a notification date we were supposed to meet, or does that?
Yeah, well, the notification, this will be the first official notification, but it has to be again prior to July 1st. Yes.
Anyone else?
And some of the individuals who might be on that bubble are very well aware of it at this time. It would not be a surprise. So.
All right. No informational items, and our nepotism discussion will be delayed?
Later.
Okay. Anything else? Short and sweet. Good. Then I'll bring this committee meeting to a close.
Just add that Member Trinka, who chairs the business committee, is out, and so Member Oswald will be running the business committee meeting. You can go ahead, Member Oswald.
Thank you. Welcome to the business committee meeting for June. We got a lengthy agenda here, and we have a couple of guest presenters to meet right away. So we'll get set up with that. I do want to note that we will be continuing our budget discussion on Thursday at the Committee of the Whole meeting that has been called for 4 p.m. on Thursday.
Is that firm? I thought it was just put on there in case.
It is firm as of right now, and we'll explain that in a little bit.
Oh, okay. I will not be there.
I just wanted that to be known for everybody present, and as we're adding chairs to load up the tables, wow, we got a party here.
Screen later on. I can be through most of it. Depends how long it lasts.
So we'll be viewing a slideshow on the wall. Welcome, everyone. Would you like us to introduce ourselves so you know who we all are?
I could probably lead off if that's okay.
That would be perfect.
Approximately a year ago, this board asked me to prepare and bring a team on board that could put together an audit of what this building might cost to renovate to keep it viable for 30 years, let's say. Not upgrade it, but upgrade systems. For example, we know the steam we use is going away in approximately 7 years. So I've been working with, to my left, Chip Jacobs from O&E, John Erickson from DSGW, and Pam Jurgensen from INSPEC. And they have all worked on this building previously. They have good working knowledge of what the needs are. And they've put together a really comprehensive presentation, which we're going to go over a portion of it, but you have much more in board book than what they'll cover tonight. But we'll do a presentation and then we'll open it up for some questions and answers and go from there. So I'll let you, Chip, and go ahead. Start, Pam.
Hi, I'm Pam Jurgensen with InSpec. A little bit more background. I know I've worked with Duluth Public Schools and the exteriors of your buildings for at least 20 years. So I have seen them grow and age just like myself. To start out with, just want to familiarize you with who is on first and what's on second. So InSpec, that would be myself at the top, is building enclosure. Next we have systems, which is ONE, and that would be Chip. And then finally we ramp up with some interiors and accessibility with John Erickson from DSGW. One sidebar that we do have to bring up, undoubtedly, with historic Old Central High School, that is the historic impact that there is, along with building codes. Undoubtedly, since 1890s or thereabouts, when this building was built, many things have changed. And of course, this building has come under historic register as of 1972. Who is really interested in this? Well, first and foremost, because it's on the National Register, it would be the State Historic Preservation Office. They very much have an interest in this building, along with 3 other local entities, and that would be the Duluth Heritage Preservation Commission, which is a city group, and the St. Louis County Historical Society, and finally the Central Preservation Committee. Those are the 3 local groups that have a vested interest. The last bullet point there speaks to what do we need to do or how do we address the historic impact, and that is we need to follow the treatment of historic properties, which is set by the Secretary of Interiors. Under the treatment, there are 4 ways to approach the historic property. One of them is rehabilitation. That is the one that we see the best avenue for this particular building. It does maintain its historic significance, but gives latitude to what the use of the building currently is. The other element would be codes. We've got building code, which of course has radically changed over the years, energy code as well, and accessibility. I don't know if you gentlemen want to chime in at this point or you want to wait for your turn.
I think we'll wait.
You'll wait. All right. They will address some of those codes or briefly address them as we go through our presentation tonight. To start with, on the building enclosure, what InSpec was saddled with was to look at leakage concerns first and foremost, then the exterior walls and chimney, entrance stairs, roofs, and windows, making a complete building enclosure assessment. Starting off with the leakage concerns, and let me back up for a moment. In your board packet, hopefully you've had a chance to look at those photos. What we have tonight is only one photo of each element, and I tell you what, your board packet will help you immensely to understand the magnitude of what I see through my camera lens. The leakage concerns, we have the north wing entrance, we have the girls' locker room, the boardroom. Maybe some of you have heard that leak, possibly. Yes, the dormer attic spaces, if anybody cares to venture, and that would be what this photo is right here. To explain a little bit about this photo, this is, of course, in the attic looking at a dormer end, and where we see this white on that red stone, that white says it's leaking. That's called efflorescence, and I'll spend a little more time on that later. Then we have a loading dock area in the basement. Another point to back up to is our work, InSpec's work on the building enclosure was during 2015 and 2016. The leaks that I have listed here may have disappeared. I don't know that they have, but they may have increased over the past 4 or 5 years. That I don't know. We'll have to get Dave to maybe chime in on that at some point. But leaks are the primary concern. If we had life safety, which I'll caveat to another point later, that would precede any leakage concerns. But when it comes to building enclosure, you want to be sure that you understand and take care of leakage concerns. The next element that we really looked at in terms of the exterior are the walls and the chimney, and that happens to be just grouped together just by virtue of where they're located. Primarily, we have deteriorated mortar, deteriorated and cracked stone, we have deteriorated chimney, and what we call deflected lintels. Deflected lintels means it's a steel structure that is starting to bow, or you may have heard the term rust jacking. And that's a feature of water and water having its way with steel. In that case, when they're deflected, they have usually some loss of section, in which case from a structural side, they don't have near the strength that they used to. If they don't have the strength that they used to, then you start thinking, well, maybe we don't have enough strength to hold up what's above it. That's a little bit of the thought process behind a deflected lintel, and that's usually a telltale that we have leakage. Then efflorescence on the bottom of the list. This particular picture, you can see a white shadow that appears from that outstanding or proud stone, and that white shadow comes down to between the windows. Now that white stain is called efflorescence. What efflorescence really means is that there is a significant amount of moisture traveling through that masonry, whatever that masonry is. And in this case, it would be your Lake Superior sandstone. Now, because it's a significant amount of moisture, that is a concern. In particular, with this sandstone happens to be very soft, and in some cases, extremely soft, where in some locations, the sandstone has actually eroded away. Efflorescence is something that by just looking at it, people may think, well, let's just wash it off. Well, that's not the point. If you have significant leakage, what does that mean? That means there's water inside the wall. If there's water inside the wall, what happens come fall and winter? That water freezes. What happens when water freezes? We all know this. We're in Minnesota. We know that water gets bigger when it turns to ice. As it gets bigger and turns to ice, that's when the damage really occurs. So efflorescence is a warning sign. It's a warning sign that we've got a lot of water and we want that water not there. We don't want to just clean it off. We want to find the source of that water, take care of it, and then consider cleaning it. Next, the entrance stairs, and I don't know that I have to do too much explaining that if you've even walked right around the front side or the main entrance there, you know very well what those stairs look like. Now, the main set of stairs going up to that main entrance and in some other areas are actually original limestone covered with concrete. And the concrete has failed in some locations. So we have a variety of things. We've got concrete landings that are cracked. We've got cracked concrete steps / limestone steps. And we have deteriorated mortar and stone sidewalls. Now the cracked terrazzo tiles really only pertain to that old main entrance. And those terrazzo tiles happen to be on a wood subfloor, which is bowing and is maybe a possible area for structural investigation, because that wood has bowed to perhaps a point that it may be a concern. But having the terrazzo tiles also just on wood in an exterior application is maybe not something that we want to continue. If we keep the terrazzo tiles, we may want to consider some other option there. Next, we have roofs. Roofs, I know we've got several kinds. You know, they're flat ones that you obviously can't see, and more pronounced, though, would be the steep ones. The steep ones have, most areas, a concrete tile that replicates slate, except for at the gym, the 1926 gym, or the Unity area, that happens to be the original slate. Now, the flat roofs generally are in pretty good condition. I understand some of them were replaced not too long ago. So our report may not be up to snuff in that regard. But the steep slope, that is probably more critical because tile are missing. Now, if tile are upstream, so to speak, and they're missing, where do you suppose they are going? They're going down with gravity. They go down to maybe that roof over the loading dock, or they go down onto the ground, which thankfully we don't have close sidewalks. So that's what happens with the missing tile. How about damaged snow retention system? You might realize, and I know that when I drive by during the winter time, the sidewalk is closed on 3rd. And why is that? Because we've got falling ice and snow. The snow retention system isn't working anymore over there, or if there was one, I guess that would be a better question. The other elements that really wreak havoc with roofs would be damage from high winds and the falling snow and ice onto those flat roofs. But other areas would be fall protection and lightning protection. In particular, fall protection is a requirement for anyone to be on the roof, even to just maintain the various vents and anything else that would be up on the roofs. And the gutters and downspouts, interestingly enough, were originally built with the building. At one point were removed. That has been one of those areas that has caused a significant amount of efflorescence. There is a significant amount of efflorescence directly underneath gutters. So that's something to consider to bring those back. Windows. I'm sure if you have an office near a window, you may very well feel what the windows are not doing for you, and that would be there is air infiltration and moisture infiltration through windows, in addition to, of course, the deteriorated sealant and glazing gaskets, which really keeps the window tight. We have some deficient operation hardware. The windows are roughly from the 1970s, so they are about due to be taken care of. Now I'll turn this over to Chip, and Chip, here you go.
Thanks.
He will talk about the systems.
Hopefully I can hit the right button. So moving on to systems within the building. So my focus was on mechanical and electrical systems. And so as Dave mentioned, steam is going to be curtailed in about 7 years. So one of our concerns is that we need to investigate potentially making a conversion to hot water from steam, or optionally putting in boilers. But that doesn't help us with our existing infrastructure, which varies in age between 1926 and 1973. Those are when the gym addition was put on, there's still a significant amount of infrastructure from that build. And then when high school moved out and the administration moved in 1973, that was the other significant remodel that occurred. And so a good chunk of the building is 73, doesn't sound that long ago, but it's 46 years now. So 46 to 90 some years old that we're dealing with. Oops, let's see. Okay, you got to give me directions on this. Forward, there we go. So fire protection. Fire protection is actually in decent shape. The building is fully sprinkled, although there are areas now that would be considered not covered that would have to be have some additional coverage. Exterior areas that have combustible construction, or spaces that are just smaller spaces that weren't necessary to be protected when the building was sprinkled. There's a fire pump, electric booster pump that's in place. It's doing a good job. Unfortunately, as we do the other build within this building, as we replace the steam system or ventilation system, essentially the sprinkler system is in the way and has to come out and go back in again. So that's really why the fire protection system gets involved. Because we have an unheated attic, we also have dry systems. So there's sprinklers up there that have compressed air in them that don't release until the air is released from the system by a sprinkler head, and then the system becomes active. Plumbing systems, again, it varies in age predominantly from the 1926 version, which is what you see here. These are the washrooms on the Unity side, back by the gym. Those are original from the 20s, and then there are fixtures that were installed in 1973. There's not a lot in between or since then. They're serviceable, but they're really not up to par. Again, with the charge that David suggested, we were looking at what's it going to take to get this building up to a point where it's a fully serviced, functional building without any to-do lists, if you will. So we looked at replacing the plumbing fixtures. Now, even if we replace these fixtures, we've got pipe in the wall that's from the 1920s, or at least an angular space where there used to be pipe, potentially underground in some instances. So it would involve a full piping replacement as well. Again, back to the steam. Some of the steam piping is from the 1970s, but steam piping has only got a projected life of about 50 years. It's fairly corrosive, particularly the condensate with the return lines. So that system starts to fail, and we will have no energy source in just a few short years. So we have to look at adopting or looking at a full replacement of that heating system somehow or another. And then for this building to function in today's world, realistically, it should have some form of cooling or dehumidification to make it more livable during the summer months. So ventilation is going to get replaced at the same time. That's also going to involve meeting today's indoor air quality standards and meeting today's energy code. I think it's the Minnesota 2030 rule is that the buildings are supposed to be 100%, what's the word for it?
Carbon neutral, is it?
Carbon neutral, essentially, by 2030. That's a no small ticket to try and get us to that point. We've also got controls from 50 years ago, so we really virtually have no control in much of the ventilation and heating system in the building. Power is actually in decent shape. Equipment from 1973, a lot of the power side doesn't look any different than it does today. It's serviceable, but as you can see from this picture, there are no gaps in this switchgear. There's no spare space. So as we add ventilation and potentially cooling, we would have to upgrade or add an additional electrical service to support that. And much of the gear is full, so we'd have to add capacity to that. It's all serviceable and functional at this point, and we don't reflect a full replacement of that service or gear at this time. Lighting is adequate, but it's fluorescent. It doesn't meet energy code, and again, as we do a ventilation project, essentially what happens is you take all of the ceiling down, all the ductwork down, all the fire protection down, and it doesn't make sense to clean 50-year-old fixtures and put them back up. It would actually be less expensive to put new fixtures in and put in LED lighting with occupancy and daylight control at the same time. Much of the egress lighting and exit lighting is quite dated and runs on internal batteries, which is expensive to maintain. We have an on-site backup generator, so we would likely move that egress and exit lighting over to that emergency system. Communications, the building either has or is scheduled to have a new fire alarm system installed shortly, and we don't have that in our pricing, but the clock system, again, putting it back to its current function, is not fully functional at this time and is included to be replaced under our pricing. Right button.
The right button. So as Pam kind of noted in the beginning, the oversight of the historic context becomes probably what we would be looking at significantly relative to finishes and accessibility. Primarily, the finishes, I'm going to break that down into historically significant elements. Primary spaces meaning your heavy public areas, your entrances, this boardroom, classrooms, that type of thing. Secondary spaces would be back of house rooms, storage rooms, supply spaces, that type of thing. So within that becomes a strategy outline for how the historic significance of this facility would then start to strategize those finishes upgrades. From the context of looking at this, we're going to put it all 100% back after all this other work that needs to be done, et cetera, and get everything up to date. So we're looking at more of a full meal deal than what might be phased in because of the historic side of it. And then the other two pieces, there's some existing original finishes, terrazzo and wood, which, the terrazzo is in fairly decent shape considering its age. There's cracks, but you expect to see that in terrazzo. As it ages, it shrinks, and there's shrinkage cracks in various areas along the hallway. The wood would be the wood floors. Most of the wood floors are covered up now with carpet, that type of thing in the classrooms. Likely what's underneath there is similar to what we found in Denfeld, where you have a wood sleeper system on top of a concrete structural floor, and then the wood floor system on top of that. And then in between those sleepers is sand that was used to deaden the space so you didn't have that drum effect. So any changes down the path that requires removing that wood floor system has to be dealt with similar to how it was dealt with on Denfeld, which was a challenge. The other stuff we look at is more of, call it the modern finishes, the carpet, the VCT, suspended ceilings, stuff that's, from the 70s renovation and the 90s refresh, and then some spots here and there. And that's LTFM, long-term facility maintenance. That's materials that are really, they have a life cycle. Terrazzo has a 100-year plus life cycle. Carpets, 15 years if you're lucky. And there's a varying range of that where I would say, I don't know if you have anything newer than 10 years from what I could tell. So I think it's a lot of that is getting to the age that's going to be required just from a maintenance standpoint to be refreshed. Suspended ceilings, as Chip said too, is all that's got to come down to get systems in there. And the suspended ceilings, majority of them are fairly tough shape. They're probably 70s. There's the sizes of them. The tile size and the grid size is a non-standard size for current ceiling systems. So with the systems upgrade, those would all have to go back in new anyway. On the accessibility side, again, the historic significance really starts to paint our picture of how we're going to approach it. And from an existing historical structure, it takes a little bit different path evaluating what are you going to try to do to get this up to code. It's not going to be 100%, here's your current ADA code, you got to meet everything. It's really looking at the existing and required level of accessibility, and I quote required because that's kind of debatable with the historic and the code officials as to what are we trying to do here. For instance, they're not going to be pushed down the path of making the historic front entrance accessible. It just doesn't make sense. It would ruin the character of the whole facility. The recent work you've done with the new parking, accessible parking, and the entrance off of 3rd Street has gone a long ways towards meeting that primary requirement for accessibility. Jumping back to finishes, we use kind of a rating, poor to excellent. We didn't get any excellent, so poor, fair, and good. Good was our, some of the more current remodels you can see in some of those classroom areas. I'm guessing those are probably about 10 years old at least. The other challenge is a lot of the office arrangements or office spaces are built with what's called a demountable partition, meaning it can be moved and reconfigured. What that also means is they just go to the ceiling, so there's likely a lot of acoustical or non-separation or acoustical transfer in between offices that may be an issue. We didn't address that. We just took the approach that that's going to stay in its current configuration. And then we looked at the life cycle, like I said, the carpets, the vinyl tiles, et cetera. Some of the, the poor condition stuff we saw in the basement, in the mechanical areas, in the storage areas, hallway, et cetera, down there where you're not, it's a non-public area, so it's a lower priority area. And then the quality and aesthetics, there's some dated finishes and colors and et cetera that would not necessarily mean it has to be replaced, but it would definitely helps identify the age of the finish. And then you've got historic features like this that generally are in good shape, but there's repair, there's water damage up on the balcony on the wood floor system. But the reality is from the current use standpoint, is the balcony going to be a public area? Likely not. So until you make that decision to make it a public space, you don't really necessarily get pushed into having to deal with some of those issues. And again, the accessibility issues, the priority strategies are start with the accessible route, from somebody with an accessible parking stall, and how do they get into the building? What's the building entrance like? And you've done recent work to greatly improve that. The vertical circulation, you have the existing elevator. While it meets the minimums, there is upgrades just in the age of it that are going to be required. The other piece is there's a couple areas that are not accessible that are being used, like the music room as part of the Unity space. I think it's the windows in that top photo. And then the gymnasium and the support spaces off of the gym. There's a small kitchen and then some fitness and locker room spaces. Technically, because they do not have an elevator, they're technically not accessible. Whether that gets pushed into an accessibility kind of depends on what's the long-term use on that. And then we get into restroom facilities, and I think primarily most of the restroom facilities, the codes have evolved over the years. So as Chip said, we've got a lot of fixture upgrades that's going to happen. Usually what happens then, we're having to get our toilet stalls to our 5-foot transfer stalls. The picture that's shown there is actually an ambulatory stall. That's now a new requirement in addition to the side transfer. The grab bar configurations currently are different than what's shown. So it becomes a little bit of a snowball effect. You're taking out fixtures, you're reconfiguring the stalls, well then you're refinishing tiles on the floor and the walls, et cetera, et cetera. And then the last piece is the interior doors and signage. The space to the right is a fairly typical door. There's a couple of configurations similar to that where you don't have the 18-inch clearance, meaning a clear floor area to get to within 18 inches of the handle so that somebody can pull that door open. And there's a number of spots that are like that technically this could be like an historic entryway that historic may want it to remain, so there may be an alternate solution to provide access into these rooms. One option is automatic door operators. Other options is put a new door in a different location. And then signage, interior signage is kind of a hit and miss as far as whether it's meeting current requirements or not, or if it's covering all the bases, so to speak. So it becomes kind of more of a process of working with the historical entities that would provide oversight in the building code and kind of negotiating those improvements based on what is the use. One last comment on the use of the facility is I think both Chip and Pam have talked about, is that we've looked at it from its standpoint of its current use. If it were to be reconfigured into some other type of use, there's another process of building code that in a change of use would require probably greater improvements or meeting codes. But again, the historical significance is going to kind of hover over the top of all those requirements. I don't know if do we need to explain that?
Well, here is what we have right now today for the estimated construction and soft costs. Soft costs, what that means is all of the costs related to the design, to going through the, sorry. The soft costs are related to all of those costs for design, for the historic research and solving those issues, and also during construction. That would be the construction observation and anything else that would happen during that time. So the soft costs are those costs for things that you can't see, the intangible. The building enclosure figure you see at the top, the 24 million, that is a figure we arrived at taking our numbers from 2015 and 2016 and applying the inflation multiplier. The inflation multiplier from that time frame from the Bureau of Statistics and a few other places that I had looked at is roughly 7.9% from that time frame to now. Keeping that in mind, if these are all today's costs, the same thing would prevail. If we elected to do this work 10 years from now, then there's that inflationary cost over 10 years, whatever that would be, or 5 years, whatever that number is, there will be an inflationary cost. So the cost you're looking at here right now would be today's dollars. Do you want to comment on your numbers?
So on the system numbers, we've actually bid 6 school projects similar to this in terms of infrastructure refresh in the last 60 days. And so those are pretty good numbers in terms of what it costs per square foot to do this type of work. It's a full MAP refresh, but not what I would call a heavy interior remodel. It's just kind of updating those systems. Not moving any interior partitions, but when you take steam radiation off the wall, you can pretty much be guaranteed that there's a lot of damage on the wall behind it, so you're going to be doing exterior wall repair and that sort of thing. So that's what that number reflects.
Yeah, and on the interiors, we look at it from a standpoint of net square footage, so evaluating the kind of the level of work in various areas ranging from anywhere like $35 a square foot to $70 a square foot using the net square footage. So that means inside the walls, gross square foot would be the footprint, so all the exterior walls. So that becomes kind of that additive. On the accessibility side, you can't really apply a square foot. We kind of looked at spot issues relative to conceptually the inaccessible areas. Add an elevator, so we built in some of those costs for those areas. Does it make sense overall? Maybe not, when you get down to it, but that would be the initial approach to get a kind of a broader understanding. And then spot work within to remove barriers like the bathrooms, redoing the bathrooms, reconfiguring a doorway opening to make it accessible, that type of thing. And then, as Pam said, the cost built in, the soft costs are built into that number.
One more item on the building enclosure, just to give you a general idea of what's included for the scope there. That it would be a process of tuck pointing, which is removing the existing mortar and putting in new. That process would be heavily guided by the historic preservation guidelines. And that would require what we call a beaded joint, where the joint actually sticks out, I would say. In that case, it is something that is a little more expensive, but that is something that is guided by the historic preservation guidelines. Other elements that would happen would be taking care of any of those deflected lintels that I talked about earlier, also any of the stone that are cracked or the stone that have actually scoured or eroded. And there are some flat areas where stone is where we would consider putting some kind of a waterproofing system on it to minimize or eliminate the water infiltration into the masonry. Now this also includes re-roofing, window replacement, some work on the stairs and entrances, but then again, that's where we start crossing over into what is the accessibility and do we have to actually change the tread and riser stairs. So that ends up making that full circle discussion of historic and code and how do we solve that. So that 24 million that you see there really is for everything that we see on the outside, just to bring it to a maintenance level. We're not gilding the lily by any stretch of the imagination. We are trying to simply bring it to a maintenance level and within historic ramifications, though. Now that was an awfully big pill to swallow, of course. We have to look at prioritization. And really, when it comes to prioritization, the three of us were talking, and this is how we see that happening, that the building enclosure does need to come first. If you don't have the building outside, you don't have much of an inside. First and foremost, the chimney. That chimney, or that large stack that is on the back side here of the building, that has a significant amount of mortar loss and is a high point, physical high point of the building. So it sustains a lot of weathering, and that really is something that should be addressed rather soon. It has a potential of being a life safety issue. Then we follow through with the roof and the masonry and the windows when it comes to building enclosure. Now, in your board packet, there was a prioritization and a sketch, a larger sketch, that would help you see maybe more digestible pieces when it comes to the building enclosure. When it comes to the masonry. The next one would be steam conversion, and we know that falls on the heels of the steam being shut off. Then ventilation and finishes and accessibility. So that's the prioritization that we have come up collectively. Of course, this is all dependent upon what the board and other entities would feel necessary to do and when, and as funding is available. Do we have any other comment on prioritization? No? Okay. All right, at this point then, we have completed our presentation. We're open to questions if you have any at this time.
We only get a limited number of microphones at a time, so that's one way to silence us. Thank you for the presentation. I feel somber and a bit emotional that it's gotten this bad. Anyone have any questions? Member Lofald.
Are we at a point in being in this building of being unsafe?
From a building enclosure standpoint, I don't think that there's anything unsafe about it, no. If you're talking about the actual occupancy inside, that would really start running down the side of structural engineer, looking at, are floors okay and so forth. I don't think any one of us have seen that to be a problem at this point, no.
My question was more about the finishes. I know that I believe it was when it was redone in the 70s, as was common in the era, to close off the top of all of the windows, and I believe the drop ceilings also dropped below that level. Is there savings to be had in there in not putting back drop ceilings and such and leaving it the original, or is that even possible with the wiring that's been done since that time to...
Interestingly enough, I just had a conversation today about another building in town that has a historical nature, and we anticipated that the Park Service was only going to require us to restore the corridor to its original appearance. And we're converting the exterior to apartments, and we thought we had, we could do whatever we wanted there, but they're actually coming back saying, no, we don't want to see anything exposed, no exposed wiring. They're going much deeper into the building than we anticipated. So it's kind of an open question as to what they might make us do there. Could you leave the ceilings out? Yes, but it will be difficult to, if you're okay with living in the conditions that this building was built under in 1900, that's fine, but under today's standards of what we expect for indoor environment, that would be difficult.
I think one thing too is that example is one of the examples that the historic rehabilitation guidelines kind of use as an example, because that's very typical and very common of what happened is, the energy crisis in the 70s happened, heating all this volume, drop those ceilings and cover up windows. That was the strategy back then. I think one thing to that I didn't point out and would factor into some of this too is depending on how work is financed over the years, if you explore historic tax credits, they have strings attached that can, if you're going to go for those credits, then they're a little less willing to bend on some of those things. If you're not accessing those credits, sometimes it's a little bit easier to do what you need to do, so to speak.
I have a question in that we obviously cannot afford to do this all at once. $48 million is more than I think I'll see in my lifetime personally, so unless good old Powerball. So how do we manage this and how do we get this into manageable chunks? That's my question, I guess, for anybody. I get the steps that you outlined. I mean, if we don't have a solid outside, we can't work on the inside because what's the point? But is there a way to make this manageable over the next many years? Or alternatively, whoever has this building, how can we make this manageable for anybody else to do it either? I mean...
Well, we have one fixed deadline on the horizon, which is the STEAM. So that, even though we have that prioritized list, that may end up driving some of that work. And it may be that you move some functions out of this building and leave it unoccupied while you're working on it, for example, so that you can phase that construction possibly. I guess I'm just kind of talking off the top of my head is how you might approach it. Obviously, we need it watertight. But we have a definite hard deadline on one particular item. So,
and that hard deadline really drives all other components because 7 years we won't have steam, so that means we have to have our heating systems converted. But the building envelope should be tight. I mean, we really have about 3 years to decide what we're going to do, but then you have to do it. You've got year 4 to design, year 5 to bid and start construction, 6 and 7 to finish up. So it sounds like a long time, but time goes by quick.
I think the other challenges too is phase construction does cost more over time because you're taking smaller bites and it's more mobilizations on the contractor side. There is cost escalations that get built into that over time But the reality is you're probably not going to hit this 100%. You would, do everything all at once. You would have to completely vacate the structure to make that happen. So that's another piece, to answer that question, that's another piece that does get factored in once a strategy gets more defined. How could this play out over a 10-year plan or something?
And just one last comment, and I think they've already pretty much hit it on the head, is that you really can't do it all at the same time, even if you have Powerball. We'd all be tripping over each other. All of our trades would be just everywhere, and you really physically can't even do it all at once. So it would be important for us three to get together and sort out what phases are going to work. It largely does depend on funding, though. Mm-hmm. And when do those dollars come available? When do they need to be spent by? If there's any of those kind of strings attached. So there's many things to think about outside of just that big number. There are many things to think about in phasing this.
Superintendent?
Yes, I just wanted to hearken back to what led up to this conversation was the beginning of conversations of what to do with this building. We knew that it needed a lot of work. It had been over 10 years since we had any kind of estimate or real numbers to work with, and so we kind of felt like we were working with guesstimates at the time. And so now that we have a better scope of the work that needs to be done, we have somewhat of the timelines. We know that STEAM is 7 years down the road, and we have some real numbers. So I think the next steps for the board in the coming months will be to have some discussion around some decisions. And I think at the heart of that is right now this building, which is iconic for our city. It's arguably one of, or the most identifiable building in the city. And the question becomes, should it stay in the public domain or should it enter into the private domain? And if it is in the private domain, then we as a community are going to have to figure out how to finance this. If that isn't the answer, then we need to have a discussion about what is the answer, where does the central office of the school district go if this is not it. And so those will be the discussions that will be coming in the next few months or year to decide what direction to go in. So at least we have good information now to build on from here.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate all the information. I think we all do. This is not an easy topic for us. And no matter what, this building has to stand. So that's all we got for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Which leads up to our next guest presenters, who I think they can probably anticipate the very first question that we will be having is, so how do we get that $48 million and how can you help us get it? Welcome. Do you know everybody here? Would you like us to introduce ourselves?
I know everyone here, absolutely.
All right.
Madam Chair and board members, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Jeff Anderson. This is Gary Sirkvenik. And first of all, I'd like to say thank you for allowing us to represent ISD 709 at the state capitol this past legislative session. It was an honor to do so, and it was an enjoyable experience working with those of you who were able to come down to St. Paul, and special thanks and recognition to the superintendent and to Ms. Erickson. They were available at the drop of a hat to help us in St. Paul, testifying at meetings and meeting with legislators and telling our story. So thank you for all of that. We were charged early on with telling the story of Duluth's issues, challenges with special education funding and its impact on the district. That was charge number one. Charge number two was working with the state to try to obtain a sales tax abatement for the central site to help with the sale or to aid in the sale of that at a future time. So we spent the majority of our time focused in on the special education challenges that Duluth suffers. And I can tell you that there is not a legislator associated with education at the state capitol that does not know what challenges Duluth faces. Gary, myself, our Duluth legislative delegation, the superintendent, Kathy, board members, were all in front of those legislators a number of times telling this story and telling what the real impacts were for the Duluth School District today and going forward. And so I think it's important to know that at the end of the day, while we did not get everything we asked for, the state did, the legislature did move some of the reimbursements from the percentage 90% to 85 to 80, and I think that Duluth schools can be very proud in knowing that we as a team played a part in making that happen for this district and for districts around the state. So to give you just a quick recap, aside from all of those meetings we attended, having the superintendent testify to the various committees, we had great partners in our Duluth delegation, Representative Olson in particular and Senator Simonson both led the charge for us in their respective bodies. Representative Schultz, Representative Murphy, Senator Bach, all were very helpful and understand the challenges and the issues before us. We did have success in the House of Representatives. Representative Olson led the charge there. We ultimately, after introducing legislation calling for the state to provide dollars to help rebuild the general fund here at the schools, ultimately the bill that was recommended or brought forward by the chair in the House called for, I believe it was $500,000 a year into perpetuity to assist the school district. The Senate, we were not as lucky, and ultimately in the conference committee, not the conference committee, I should say, the governor, the speaker, and the Senate majority leader towards the end of session made the decisions on what would ultimately be in the education bill, and we were not successful in moving forward all that we wanted. Gary may want to comment about the end of this particular session and how different it has been than past sessions with the governor, speaker, and Senate majority leader making those decisions.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Gary Sirk-Fennick, and I'm working with Jeff on your behalf in St. Paul. And before I get into that end of the session thing, I'd like to say what an honor and responsibility it is on our part to represent you and the citizens of Duluth and the children of Duluth down at the legislature. And we knew it was a difficult task to try to accomplish. You're really behind by this funding system through no fault of your own. You're an outlier of school districts throughout Minnesota because of the charter school situation we face in Duluth, which sets you over $1 million behind every year. You came into this looking at a $4.3 million just special education deficit where you spent your reserves. And I think everybody now in St. Paul, once they hear how you've tried to responsibly manage your own special education budgets, while one was out of control, really brought you a lot of credibility as a board and as an administration on, you're trying to do your best under law to manage the system that you ended up getting from above. And from above, the system needs to change. And that was our basic message. And sometimes you wonder, what do lobbyists do, right? I think what we try to do for you and for others is to make efficient use of your time, number one. Instead of not knowing who to see, we kind of know who to see based upon our experience in terms of who are the decision makers. We try to make your message more concise, and so you can tell somebody in a minute or two what your problem is and get them to react, because we have to deal with 201 legislators, we have to deal with administration, we have to deal with other constituency groups and other forces at play. And then number three, we also try to use good tactics that change during the course of the session to advance your goals, good strategies that advance your goals. And so some of the things that we did, just to give you a flavor for it, knowing that we live in divided government. The people vote for two political parties in Minnesota to run the system who have really opposite viewpoints and opposite philosophies of spending, taxes, government. And we're forced to get something through in that system that's, everyone wants government to operate like a business, but it doesn't. And that's because people have different viewpoints, and it's where you bring conflict together and try to resolve them. And that's what we try to do, is to try to figure out, okay, in the House, we probably had a better shot. In the governor's office, we probably had a supportive administration. But in the Republican Senate, they were not going to increase education spending dramatically. And so under that basis, how do we try to get a part of any increase that may exist in that body dedicated to our goals? And we knew there's really no Republican representatives in Duluth in the Minnesota Senate, nor in the Minnesota House. So it's a little tough sell there. And I'm not saying it negatively about that party. I'm just telling you the reality of it. And so we had to figure out, okay, we need allies. Who in the state has a similar situation, not as bad as ours, but who's similar? And we were able to reach out to Senator Jasinski in Faribault and the Rochester school system, where there were 2 members on the Senate Education Committee who ended up being on the conference committee. And so we thought that that would give us, if we could design a legislative package that just didn't meet Duluth's needs but met 2 other districts' needs, we'd have a higher chance of getting it done. So that's the kind of stuff that we try to bring to the table, which we were able to work really well with the superintendent and your CFO because of Kathy's relationship with some of the House staff people who understand this complex education funding. So we were able to access the right staff, develop the right bill, and I think we really had a shot at it. But what happened now towards the end of the session, when everyone's trying to do these things for multiple districts throughout Minnesota, is the public was really locked out of the legislative process because conference committees weren't able to make a decision on the education finance bill. And then it went behind the closed doors with the Speaker, the Majority Leader of the Senate, and the Governor. And folks like us and you didn't have access to that. And instead of diving into the details of legislation and hundreds of pages, they were forced to just say, look, we got to come to a decision. Let's put it into the formula. We're taking out all these specialized provisions because we can't agree. And a lot of these things went by the wayside. We were able to have $1 million increase in the base back from 2016 going forward every year in the House bill. If we would have had that, it would have solved a bunch of our problems going forward. That went away. The system that we came up where we take an average of your education spending bill every year, average of the charter, and doing an average of the averages, and that becomes a cap. It was really an innovative solution, I think, and caught a lot of imagination of legislators, but that got thrown by the wayside. That would have had a huge impact for our system. So those are the types of things that I think we've learned work. They're good public policy provisions. They have strength. Other constituency groups that we work with saw some, elegance in those things, and that they have a chance of happening in the future. So, that end of the session had some good things, 2 and 2 for the system, some education, special education caps, but there wasn't enough to solve our problems. Now, going forward, how do we solve those problems? Is next year going to be better? I have to be frank with you, it probably is going to be very difficult next year because the legislature and the governor decided to spend $500 million more than they had. They basically took money out of the reserve to fund the 2-year biennium budget. That means there's a structural deficit in the budget going into the next biennium. That probably means unless the economy somehow keeps growing, that there's not going to be a lot of extra money available in the second year of the biennium. Now, the legislature next biennium has a short session. Historically, they have done individual finance bills for education, for environment, for all transportation, etc. But in recent history with divided government, some of these bills pass and the governor vetoes them. Sometimes they don't pass anything, they just leave because they don't really have to pass a tax bill. They don't have to pass supplemental bills. So our focus is going to be trying to get into a supplemental budget bill, first of all, that the governor is going to bring forward to the legislature next year. We've already had discussions with the governor's staff on education on that. Jeff has reached out, as the superintendent has, to the commissioner of education to try to get her up here to Duluth to talk specifically about getting into next year's budget. So those are some of the tactics that we're going to be working on in this off session to try to prepare ourselves for the chance of being successful next session. So maybe I should, both Jeff and I should stop talking for a little bit and take some questions from you. Okay. Excuse me.
How about $48.5 million?
We thought we'd get to the easy stuff later. It's an interesting question. When I saw that number up there, I'm thinking, okay, how do we help? And of course, I haven't had a lot of time to think about this. Historically, schools aren't eligible for bonding, capital bonding. In some instances, it has happened. It has happened when people got creative. It's happened on tribal land for tribal schools. Capital bonding has been used, general obligation bonds. But generally, the legislature says if we do that, that's all we're going to have is a capital bonding bill for schools, and we won't have anything else because there's such a need out there. However, if you have a private sector development here in a public building, there's potential for that. And you can look at some historical examples where nonprofits have received bonding, general obligation bonding, even though they're, quote, not eligible for it. YMCA in Minneapolis, leaseback programs with the Science Museum in St. Paul. Those types of things have happened when there's a government entity, like a city that takes over a project and then does a lease at non-market rates. So there's ways to potentially do it, but if you're having it as a school, capital bonding is probably not an option. General fund could be an option, however. However, I think your focus is going to be make sure you get it into special education first. So I think it needs for us to explore that a little bit more. We don't have a clear answer, but it's a really tough thing.
Thank you. I just wanted to make a couple comments on the process from our perspective, and for me, especially the process, what we started with and what we ended with were two different things, but a much better message. And that really had a lot to do with the time that we spent, the time that we communicated, the relationships that we built down at the Capitol. I can say that by about the third or fourth time we went down, people that saw us went, "Oh, Duluth's here again," which I think was a great thing. And they recognized us and they saw our message. We started out with, and we all know special education is complicated, very complicated. We knew the end number we needed to get to. We didn't necessarily know how to get to that number, and it was being able to dialogue with both House and Senate research, getting those meetings and being able to sit down with them, with those people that have that great knowledge, being able to use some of our connections at the Department of Education to work to really the half of the half, as Gary had suggested, wasn't really our first process. But I tell you, when we had meetings with legislators, they were like, "I get that. That makes sense." And we didn't start that way, but we ended that way because we had great dialogue and we were able to adjust our message to say, here's our story and here's what's fair. And that was the piece that I think was the other part of this story that we kept saying was, this is so unique to Duluth, and the timing of what happened when new legislation happened that caused this calculation to be different for us than it was for other people wasn't anything we could control, but there was an opportunity to fix it. And while it was ultimately disappointing that we didn't see it at the end, it was there until almost the bitter end. I mean, every week we would follow I'm sure most all of you have the legislative website as your favorite bookmark like mine, but we would check the status of those bills and we would contact Jeff and Gary and say, are we still, and we would still be in the bill, and we'd be like, we're still in. I mean, it was because we know the journey that so many bills take, and we understand the process of how many things get introduced. If you type in education into a legislative or a bill search bar, there's hundreds of bills, and everyone has needs. And the fact that we made it to the day before the special session, that we were still in that version of the bill, I think was a testament to all the work that we did and all the work that you helped us with. And I hope that we can continue to dialogue, even though we're not in session at the legislature. This conversation can't stop. We have to keep talking. We have to keep talking to the department, to our communities, to other districts. The other thing is that other districts went, oh, hey, we see what's happening there. We maybe don't have the exact same situation, but that could help us as well. So again, thank you for all the work and the support. And I think it made our message so much better. I learned so much more. And I got to share a lot of nerdiness that I appreciate. So that was really, I know when Jeff, I think, first started, I'm like, I get to spread the love of school finance to you guys. And you could speak to it as if you were the experts on this. And that's another testament to the messaging that goes down there. We were only down there maybe 10 times. They were down there every day. And seeing legislators and seeing people and going, hey, Duluth, the special ed, they're like, oh yeah, so you could ask them to tell the story and they could tell it as good as we could. So I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Yes, I too, I've been at this for a while now, and the difference between having Jeff and Gary at the Capitol telling our story and keeping an eye on things, and having worked trying to do this ourselves and trying to track bills ourselves and try to know when committees are coming up and when to speak, to this year having either Jeff or Gary say, hey, get in the car, we'll explain on the way down. Knowing that they were down there putting our name on the list to make sure that we had the opportunity to speak. They were having small conversations before we got there, so that when we walked in the room, they knew why we were there, they knew who we were, and it added so much complexity to what we were able to do that when we went down there, in the past we would get appointments with basically people who knew us and agreed with us, and it may not have been the right people all the time. And this time, I don't know, I think we met with 40, 45, 50 different legislators, and multiple times, and they truly understood why we were there. And so I think that going into the summer, going into next session, there's a foundation that's built on these topics, and they know we're coming back, and the governor and the commissioner, the lieutenant governor, all know what our situation is and what we're looking for and what we need to be able to survive financially. And so I really appreciate everything that you've done. It was also great to know that Gary knew all the places, like, oh yeah, put your jacket over here. No, we're going over here for coffee. Some of those little secrets of the Capitol that not everybody knows, the shortcuts through the stairwells and such. But I truly had a great experience working with you, and look forward to next year when we can get right in there. As Kathy was saying, we didn't necessarily start with the right strategy, but I think we left off with the right strategy to pick it up next year. And we've had several conversations with legislators already since the session is over, and they said, yep, next year, policy, we're on this. And so it was a good session. So thank you for all your support, and thanks to Kathy for the hours in the car going back and forth from the Capitol. I think we can tell you where all the Dairy Queens are. Thank you.
Member Lefferkamp, I know you've had your light on and off a lot.
Yeah, I just, I guess, reiterate again a huge thank you for the many ways that have been talked about that you gave our message out there, and you continued to build relationships, and you provided opportunities for both us as board members as well as for Kathy and Bill numerous times. And so just huge thank you. I know one of the things I heard both when I was down there as well as around legislators in different ways is Duluth was so present this year. Duluth public schools were so present, and so I know you guys made that happen. I want to know what are your thoughts on what we can now be doing now through the summer, in the fall, as we build up to the legislative session again. And I know that, there are some potential meetings that are coming up, but, yeah.
Madam Chair, board members, a few of those things. First of all, we are working on setting up that meeting with the Education Commissioner and to engage her and her staff. They know this isn't going away. They know we're not going away. So we want to continue to keep them educated on where the district is and strategies moving forward. We are working on setting up a meeting this summer for the board and administration with our local legislative delegation, because it's important that they continue to hear from all of us as to, again, the current status of where things are in the district, and again, what our strategies are moving into this next session and where they can play a role. We would like to also suggest drafting a letter to our federal delegation talking about the federal government's need to step up in support of special education and meeting an obligation that they have never met. And that is something we will help draft for the board to consider sending to Senator Klobuchar, Senator Smith, and Representative Stauber. And then brainstorming on other strategies when it comes to issues like the tax abatement for the central school site. That, along with many other districts who had a similar ask, went to the wayside this year because of the heavy fiscal note that such a proposal carries. And so there's strategies for that particular project moving forward into future years. So there's many things we can be doing, brainstorming, continuing to talk to these elected officials, and just be ready to hit the ground running come February 11th of 2020.
That's an excellent overview, and I think one of our focuses is going to be where we were successful this year is Kathy's relationship with the Department of Education, because a lot of times if you go in there and say, hey, we have a problem, and then the staff in the House or the Senate or the chairs talk behind the scenes with the Department of Education, they say, well, they really don't have a problem. There's something else going on. Here, with Kathy's relationship there, you're able to engage them to say, yes, this is a specific problem, and Duluth is right, and that credibility is so important to get something specific done. So we got to build upon that this summer. We got to build on that with the commissioner when she comes up here, and with potential other allies, like the superintendent's already reached out to Minneapolis schools who have a similar problem, and maybe we need to shift our focus from Rochester to Minneapolis a little bit this next session. So those are the things that we're thinking about and trying to engage for this downtime period to prepare. What would be very good is we walk in the next session and we have the governor's staff, the commissioner's staff, and House and Senate staff, professional staff saying, yeah, this is a potential solution that you have drafted. So instead of drafting it in April, next year we probably walk in with something that, has touched the level of credibility with the professional people, and then, how do we get it passed in a budget that may be difficult. So that's kind of what we're trying to do, I think.
Okay, great. And just, great overview. And I know it doesn't even speak to the hours of time and setting up meetings and making talks happen testimonies happen and all of that. And I just really think we made a very good decision when we decided to work with these two folks, and I look forward to great ideas for what we can be doing between now and February 11th, and look forward to working with you again.
Thank you.
So a lot of what I would say, but my list has already been shared too. But again, just another shout out and thank you. And we were, as board members, I thank you for the vote we took back in January, early February, to decide to bring lobbyists back into our district. We have had a lobbyist as part of our board work and part of our district, and we walked away from that, and I think we are smart to make a commitment to doing this because of the other thing I really heard from Jeff and Gary too is how they can help us educate us. I've gone to the school board day at the Capitol, and my second year I was a little bit better than my first year. But then, with your help, I would feel less intimidated. I think I know how to share our story. I know I can do a lot of that confidently. It's like where to put your coat, or it's like who do we need to contact, and be more deliberate with it. So I look forward to, in my third term, my third year on the board, of becoming much more active as a board member. I've got the time to come down and be a part of the visibility, and that will help. And I would encourage any of us to do that as well. So thank you. I think as a board, we should be writing a letter with our signatures and sending them to our local representatives, thanking them for their work they've done. Maybe some of you have done that individually, but I think as a board with our chair's signature would really be a good way of connecting with them. I love the idea of meeting with our local legislators this summer to, again, verbally thank them, but then get them listening to us and us listening to them to make a better start. I don't want to be a downer at all, but I do understand, and thank you for your reflections on what happened at the end and how 2 and 2 became a stronger decision when other things weren't going to fall. But with that, I think our districts across the state, our teachers, our leadership, our superintendents, it helps the bigger schools because they have bigger populations. And 2 and 2 will help us, but it doesn't go as far as some of the other asks that we could have had. So your information too about what next session, shorter session, be more centered on small, the asks, the individual asks, and not so much on the formulas. Because really I see how that just helped bigger schools more so than others. And then when we're in a culture of equity and wanting a fair playing field across our state for education for all students, that seems to have just been a little bit of a negative. And I like the direction of being, what do we do in the off season? And so you've given us direction there as well, because we don't want to go backwards. And again, Kathy, even though I want to tell you that sometimes I put your colored graphs on my refrigerator, I did put the updates on the bills that were being sent, because our Minnesota School Board Association is so good at sending those to us, and those were on my refrigerator. So I was hoping that we'd get in there, but I know we were there till the end. So thank you again very much.
You're welcome.
Continued relationship with you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I would just like to add one more thing, and that is we were blessed by having a good Duluth legislative delegation where, when we met with our delegation, we didn't have to convince them. They were your allies from day one, and they gave us a lot of flexibility to draft what we needed to act when we needed to act. And so our authors were really excellent and very supportive, and we were lucky with that. And I think the other thing that, on behalf of Jeff and myself, I'd like to add, even though I don't live in Duluth, I live in St. Louis County. And, and Jeff lives here in Duluth, and it's rare in these areas outside of the Twin Cities where you find lobbyists who actually know what's going on in the community. And so it's good to have Jeff's view of this down at the Capitol, and that helped us a lot as well. So thank you very much for your kind words and for your support, and hopefully we can do a little better job next year for you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And thank you for all your hard work, and you're welcome to come back anytime. So.
Great. Okay.
We're pretty entertaining, as you can tell. So. Member Loeffler-Kemp, did you have anything else to say?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that was the fun part of the meeting, just saying. So we get to talk about all things numbery. So I shouldn't say that was the fun part, because this is Kathy's fun part. So anything you'd like to highlight in the financial report? Numbers, investments, monthly APUs, fund graphs.
I would like to just briefly talk about pupil units again. You know, this is my favorite monthly topic. Just this morning, the first run of year-end fiscal year 19 ADM adjusted average daily membership projections came out for final. They're not final. This is kind of that first run. As you know, it takes all the way until November 30th until pupil counts get final. There are monthly resubmissions. When there's a student file that is in conflict with either another district or doesn't have complete information, it errors out, and no one gets the money until the error is fixed. So, for example, if we have a student whose first enroll date is one date, but the same date is also the end date at another district, neither district gets the money until one person changes the date. So there's a lot of communication that needs to happen with some of those files. The number that posted today, so keeping in mind that this year's budget was estimated at 8,178 adjusted average daily membership. That has been our goal for budgeting. What came out today was 8159, which you might go, ooh, that's low. This does not include our independent study students yet. A lot of those records are manually adjusted during this time, so they'll get submitted at the end of this month, and we'll see those getting adjusted. Talking with Kateri Little, our Mars person, she's estimating anywhere between 20 and 25 additional ADM, which gets us to 8179, which is really fantastic as far as estimates. As we were seeing these last couple months, as we kind of talked our last two business committee meetings, it looked high in February and March, and then April and May we got new estimates that had looked like we were dropping significantly lower. And again, this is just the trend of enrollments coming in and out of the district. We have a migration of students in and out because of different programs and different sites that we have. And again, because we have many students who are hourly versus seat-based or enrollment-based on a daily basis, those were some of the challenges there. So I feel pretty good about the numbers now. And again, you're not actually seeing that because that report just came out today, but we'll continue to update you. So that number was good. From a budgeting standpoint, from a pupil count perspective, we are still budgeting at 8116. Again, we had updated that from April when we were kind of at 8146. We still want to see, because keeping in mind FY18, we were at 8215. So even though 8178, we're hitting that target where we thought we were, it is significant, not significant, it's less than 2018, so we felt it was important to continue that minor decline in enrollment going into fiscal year 20 from a budget perspective. So we are at the 8116 as an estimate, and again, we'll continue to look at that and edit as we go along. So just from a pupil perspective, I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware that it looks like our target goals should be very solid for fiscal year 19 and that we maintain that same estimate going into 20.
Questions? Come on, she wants a question over there. She wants to talk numbers all day. Okay, well, we're moving on. Thank you for that. We have fundraisers, which Ordine East apparently let loose and had a bunch of money coming in the last couple of months. Any questions on that? We get to move on to our child nutrition stuff. We're raising our prices of student lunch 10 cents for breakfast and lunch. We do this every year because they say we have to, which I disagree with, but we do it anyway. I don't think they should have to tell us how much we can charge for our lunch, but I guess I'm wrong.
Member Oswald, do they pay for breakfast?
Well,
our students? Is that a free breakfast? And our lunch prices are
Student
going
lunch
up.
costs and secondary lunch. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not breakfast, no. Yep. So we have no bids, no RFPs, no quotes, no policies, no regulations. So we're on to contracts, and we have some Sourcewell contracts for the changing our bathroom construction project at Lincoln Park Middle School to accommodate some of our students. Would you like to talk about that, Mr. Spooner?
Sure, I can.
Okay.
I can talk to that subject. We have identified a need for a new shower, toilet, sink, changing table, bathroom setup at Lincoln Park Middle School. And this is needed due to special education program, and possibly the superintendent or assistant superintendent can speak to the reasons why. But we're in the process. This is really a fast-track project. We're using Gordian Easy IQC state contract procured construction. The documents for the board to sign relating to the cost and allowing them to proceed probably won't be here until mid next week. It's just really a tight timeline. I'll get those to you as soon as I can. But if you're in Lincoln Park and you were to walk into that space, my practice or my goal would be, we don't want to construct something that looks like it was an afterthought or remodeling. The bathroom will fit. If you're in that space, you'll say it was probably, you'd think it was built when the school was built. So it's nothing extravagant, but it matches existing construction features and it looks the same. It'll serve the same functions, and it will meet the need of the staff there. And that's about to the extent of what I can describe on that project.
I will say that the special education suite, as Mr. Spooner was talking about, does not currently include a bathroom facility right in the suite. We are seeing an increase in the level of need of students who are coming to the program, where we do need a complete washroom facility within the suite. And this is not a short-term need as we look at our programming and we look at the needs of our students from elementary on up. We have a significant increase in the level of assistance that our students need in toileting. And so we need this facility. Without it, they would need to go down to first floor and go into an area that is currently a staff washroom, or they would need to go down to first floor and to the other end of the building to more towards the pool area. And so it would create a significant barrier for these students if we did not move forward with putting this project in.
From a funding standpoint, I just wanted to talk briefly. Normally, a construction project like this does not qualify for state special education funding, so this would not have qualified under 740, is that our special ed code that we talk about. This would have had to have been done using regular operating capital, long-term facilities maintenance dollars, other things like that. What we did do then was try to get creative, and we did. We found out that if we were to apply to utilize some of our federal dollars, if the Department of Education would approve that, some of the things that we code with our federal funding, which some of those are benefits, our employee benefits, if we transferred those to a state expenditure, they in fiscal year 20 and 19 will qualify for some of our special ed reimbursement. We're now in the formula versus past years where our expenses have been so high that we haven't been able to gain our full reimbursement. So by just shifting some things around, being creative, we won't actually see the reimbursement until fiscal year 21, because as you know, special education funding takes a year to get that reimbursement back. But by doing this, we were able to utilize existing federal special ed dollars, transfer some of those benefits to state, which then qualify. So we didn't get new money, but we were able to leverage some reimbursement for qualifying expenditures that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to do. If it would have run through our operating capital or long-term facilities maintenance dollars, there would have been no reimbursement. So working with our special ed team here at the district, they were able to put the project plan. Mr. Spooner had to do a lot of information in a really short period of time so that we could get that approval from the state. And the Department of Education was very good to work with. They helped us make sure that we put in the right criteria so that we could get that approval as well. So knowing there was a need, we were able to kind of work creatively to leverage as much dollars as we can. And I really appreciated both administration and tracking down the superintendent to get that signature that day, because we had to turn it in by a certain period of time to get those approvals done. And so with that, that was able to best utilize our dollars that we could. Thank you.
And that's why we pay you the big bucks. Thank you for that financial expertise on how to stretch our dollar, because we need a lot of that. We have 2 change orders. Would you like to highlight either one of those, Mr. Spooner?
Change order number 1 is a no-cost change order, and how that came about was the as-built, which are drawings that show what was done in 2001, showed concrete thickness to be 4 inches, but when we saw cut it and opened it up, it was 6 inches. So we went back and negotiated with Northland Constructors, the contractor that's on the project, and we wanted to go back with 6 inches, and that's an equal no-cost change, because if they would have had to go to 4 inches, they would have had to have put in Class 5 compacted 4 inches of concrete, and that would have been extra work for them. So the extra concrete material balanced out the extra work. So we went back with what we had. That was change order number 1, no cost. Change order number 2 is kind of hard to explain in a setting like this, and that's why I sent the email to everybody, hoping that people could see what I was trying to describe. And if you looked at this table as an oval, if this were the track, there were 2 dips in the end. Everything from one side of the track drains this way to a catch basin sitting off. If this is north and this is south, there's a catch basin on the south end. Everything drains all the way around to the south end, then out to a catch basin. The contractor had done some work where the elevation of the drain tile had sank, and they apparently didn't tell us. I wasn't on that project at that time, but we found where they had shimmed it up with concrete, shimmed the grade, so it appeared that the trench drain was at the correct elevation. And of course we can't go back that way, so we had to cut out 130 lineal feet of trench drain and put it in at the right elevation to ensure water drains correctly and doesn't get restricted in the trench drain. So that's change order number 2 of $30,100. But not considering that change order, everything on that project in general is going really well, and I'm really happy with it. And I think the Denfeld and other communities and schools will enjoy that track once done for many years.
Had we noticed a drainage problem, or was there any indication there might be something like this before?
No, there would be no way to notice it unless you actually pulled up the drains and actually looked. I mean, there would be ponding water on both sides before it got to the outlet, but the only way you'd notice that is if you actually took up the drains, and they're pretty secured because we don't want kids taking drains up. So there was no way to know unless you had actually taken it apart.
Okay. Good detective work. And then we got the deduct change order, where we get a little bit of money back, apparently.
Right. This is with Krauss Anderson and the Denfeld Stairwell Project. When I brought the documents to you to sign in April, they had done about a 95% review of the project, and they knew that was a max number, but we needed to get that contract to the board to allow them to start in May. I knew there'd be a deduct coming. I was hoping it would be $17,000 instead of $1,700, but any deduct is better than no deduct, and we know the final cost. The project is moving ahead. They're onto the third stairwell, and it's going well.
Excellent to hear. Any other questions? Okay. Resolutions. We got some donations. We get to talk about reauthorizing bank people. And I just got logged out of board book because it does that. Ta-da, there we are. So apparently Barbara Switzer is wanting to do some banking. Yay. All right, we got release and pledge of collateral. We've done this before. I have no, did you just want to go over that for a second so you're all reminded on what that means?
Sure, both of these resolutions are with Harbor Point Credit Union. Since we have a number of accounts there, most of our student activity accounts are through the credit union, that our total aggregate dollars there exceed the FDIC insurance of $250,000. So we ask Harbor Point to pledge CDs, or these are federal treasuries, to help cover in case of any losses through the credit union. They would cover our accounts. These are just two investment instruments that have matured, so now we have to release these, and they are pledging replacement instruments to keep our collateral going.
Thank you for that. It's always good to know our money grows. And now we get to go to the fun part that we can talk about adopting our 2020 budget. My CFO Erickson needs some extra time to go over some things before she just presents it to us, and I know she wants to talk a little bit about that right now, so before we meet on Thursday.
Thank you. And I apologize if there was some miscommunication. I saw the posting for the meeting on Thursday on Board Book, so I had reached out earlier to say that if we could get some more time, so I understood that there was going to be a meeting, so maybe if those of you that weren't aware, I saw the posting and just thought that meant there was communication that it had gotten posted for Thursday. Just as a review, we did have our committee of the whole meeting last week where we did go over an overview of our revenues and expenditures. We introduced all of the funds for the first time versus our focus and concentration on the general fund for the past several months. As we're walking through and we talked about our different goals and strategies, part of this process has been that we are using a set of assumptions and a set of estimates that got us to this budget as we are right now, and we continue to review more of the detailed line items as we go into some of the areas within the budget. We also received some questions and comments from some board members that we wanted to make sure that we would be able to spend enough time kind of drilling down into some of the components of the budget, things such as compensatory education that I know we've had some questions on, and wanting to make sure that we present that in a more understanding format. With that said, we were hoping that we could then spend that time on Thursday to kind of go over more of those details on Thursday to kind of answer any of those questions that board members would have, and then also give you some time too to have any follow-up questions before we got to the final board meeting. If there was going to be folks that couldn't make it, I think I heard you mention that, we can certainly transmit that information as well, just as a summary, so that you can see that what we're going through and what we're talking about as well. So with that, I would happy to answer any questions, but that we would like to dialogue on Thursday.
So yeah, I was under the same understanding, Member Lofeld, that it was only going to be if necessary, but it is necessary. So I guess that's the way it works, and that's why we record meetings too. So I hope that that one will be recorded. And Is that a yes, it would be recorded on Thursday? Okay, thank you. So, we'll have that to review. And as always, I'm sure you can send questions to CFO Erickson. Anything else we need to cover on that? Any other questions? Okie dokie. Then we get to talk about the sale of Hartley property, maybe. My agenda says documents pending still, so those documents are going to be there before next week. Okay. Any member Lofall, do you have a question about that?
Are we going to get something loaded on the board book for Thursday's meeting, or not until Thursday?
It's possible that they could be available tomorrow. We're still working on putting some of our documents together, so we'll see how quickly we can put those together.
Okay. And we got some expenditure contracts.
Hey.
Oh, so sorry.
It's okay.
Are you a little anxious over there? Thanks. Go right ahead.
I just wanted to back up to item F again on the Hartley property. Sure. Just a reminder that you did have a closed session on that and had discussion in there, and that would remain, the details of that would remain confidential until a closing. What you would expect is to take action on a purchase agreement.
And then after we vote is when it would become public?
Nope, after the closing, which is scheduled
later. Okay. We're all clear on that. We get to vote on something super secret. Yes. Oh. I'm just kidding. All right. So now we can move on to expenditure contracts. Anyone? We got some people working in our district. I'm noting on there the cooperative strategies contract for the boundary planning at $75,000. So that's a lot of money, and it will be well worth it. CFO Erickson.
I just wanted, we left that, we had this discussion at agenda setting that the board had approved the moving forward at the April meeting, but we're actually having the contract now, so it's not that we're doing it twice, but that it has been approved. So
thank you for that. I appreciate seeing that contract. Any questions on the extension or renewal contract signed? No. I noticed that it's a lot of our labor renewal contracts that we've had previously approved renewing without a lot of discussion. I guess I kind of have a generalized question with movement forward with the medical district and contractors possibly becoming much more harder to find. Do you think that we will be able to transition in the future to hiring employees instead of having to do contracting out?
In general, I think we would stay with our T&M contracts. The employees that we employ, whether it's a carpenter, painter, plumber, electrician, they do maintenance work. Mm-hmm. The T&M contracts that we have do more like, if you could call it, capital construction. If the superintendent and the assistant superintendent had one giant office and they wanted a wall built between them, we would not use our people to build that wall. That's new work, and that's what the T&M contracts are for. If we have a light fail in this room, our electrician would fix it. But if we had an LTFM project that changed out 12 lights to high efficiency LED, we would have our T&M do that.
Okay. I'm sure it's,
so it's kind
all
of
economical.
It's a different philosophy of what contractor does what,
okay,
and what our in-house people do.
Good to know. Member Lafleur?
Yeah, I would just add thank you for that explanation. I mean, contracting out is generally when you're contracting services that we could already be doing with our current staff. So I appreciate that explanation for all board members. Thank you.
Yeah, we have roughly 20 T&M contracts, and they mirror or go beyond what we employ in-house.
Good to know. Thank you for that reminder. All right, we got no cost contracts for field experiences and revenue contracts. Woohoo, we made some money this month. That puts a smile on CFO Erickson's face when we make some money. So, any other questions about any of those? Going once, going twice? All right, I'm ready to be wowed with a facilities report.
Thank you. I'll have to read. It was a good end of the year. Our people have done a great job. Our staff, the facilities maintenance and operations staff, did a great job of keeping the buildings clean and conducive for teaching and learning the entire year, and it went well, and now it's time to deep clean in the summertime. We continue to work with the firemen and oilers to update position descriptions. As far as the safety grants, I think at the education committee, possibly the assistant superintendent explained that we had received 2 grants from MDE and 1 federal grant, the COPS grant. So I think you're aware of that. Meetings are continuing to occur for the installation of those security features. I think you also maybe had in the ed package the grant that Lowell Barnes had from Essentia, the $5,000 Nature Play grant, where they're improving their nature play area this summer. Deep cleaning and maintenance was performed on all 4 turf fields. This went really well, and I was surprised that our fields are performing as well as they are with all the use. We had satisfactory GMAX testing on all of them, and they are all very clean, and they're all back to, I'd say, close to new condition. We are completing, now that spring is here, the deficiencies that we had related to the civil rights inspection last fall, and those deficiencies related to width of parking spaces and for handicap accessibility vans and cars at Denfeld and East. We are doing some parking lot preservation this year, crack grinding, filling, similar to what you see on city streets and roads where they grind the cracks out. They backfill it with backer rod or just with tar, and then they put the paper on it till it dries. We have started the track replacement project, the LTFM FY20, and the Denfeld stairwell, which you're aware of. The Hawks audit work is underway and presented tonight. Work is beginning on the historic Old Central High School, this building, the fire alarm system replacement project. I've also included the Lincoln Park Middle School new bathroom shower facility, and planning meetings have been begun for FY21 LTFM, which we'll bring to you next month. Operations, we have some vacant positions we're advertising for. Health and safety, we had a fire marshal audit and did well. Playground inspections were completed, and we found between 9 and 12 inches of depth in fall protection, or 9 and 11 inches. We shoot for 12 inches, and we've got 4 playgrounds that we'll have to make up some fall protection this summer. We'll have to add more tamarack. And as far as everything else, work comp, we had 27 first report of incidents, and we had 2 OSHA recordables. And I think the balance of the report is kind of self-explanatory. If I can certainly answer any questions that anybody might have on that.
Yeah, I just, under the workman's comp activities, the training videos, sensory training videos, remind me who RAS, who created those videos? You have RAS, I can't remember.
Yeah, well, MMA is our insurance carrier or broker. Okay. You could look at it. And RAS is our work comp insurance provider.
Okay.
And they work closely with us to help people get people back to work, provide training when and where or if we need it. They're there to assist us and keep our costs in check.
Okay, so how do we make sure the staff that need it are viewing these trainings, videos?
That's a combined effort with Jason Barsness, our health and safety coordinator, in our office with other district leadership, with the assistant superintendent, the safety committees. They all work together to ensure the right people view these videos and learn appropriate actions and different methods in which they can conduct their day to hopefully prevent injury.
Okay, great. Thanks for including that on this.
Sure.
Superintendent?
I just wanted to add that some of that training was done by our staff and not in videos. So some of our oh my gosh, I've totally lost the word. I've lost it. The training that Ron did, the crisis prevention, but there's another word. Anyway.
It's getting late.
Anyway. CPI? Yeah, but what is CPI? Anyway.
That training.
The word will come to me as soon as I turn this light off, I'm sure. But some of our training was with staff, and then there were also reminders through the weekly superintendent briefing, things about, it's icy out, be careful where you're walking, and picking up things that we see in the cafeteria and not climbing on inappropriate things like counters or stools or chairs to hang things up to avoid slips and falls.
Remember that again?
Yeah, and would you just, as you're meeting with your different staff out in the schools, thank them from the board for all the work that happens in the summer that does not go unnoticed. And we know everything has stepped up quite a bit and with the work that they're doing. So
I definitely will. Thank you.
Will you please thank them? Yeah.
All right. Any other questions about that? We have the property update. Central's still for sale. And, we'll take some offers. Anyone, anywhere. And we already went over the audit and the legislative update. That only leaves the future items of our wonderful 10-year capital facilities plan with the review of grants and donations and all things insurance with a few policy updates. Other than that, if we have no other comments, we are adjourned.
Okay, we'll see everybody on Thursday at 4:30. Or 4, I think we said 4. Yeah, 4 o'clock.
I heard whoever it was that also understands. So I don't know whatever happened.
De-escalation.